In Scotland, there can be nothing more iconic than tartan in all its colour and variety. But how did it evolve? How's it made? Why does it look like that? And as a Scottish Ghanaian, can I have a tartan? Could you design your own one too? If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and ring the notification bell to be told when I upload new videos. In the meantime, let's unravel tartan. Have you ever thought how cool it would be to have your own official tartan? So have I. The question is, where do you start? I'm starting by going to meet Scotland's most renowned tartan historian and patterns expert to find out how we got here and what's involved. So come with me. I'm meeting up with tartan expert Peter MacDonald, who knows everything there is to know about tartan. If you want a proper historical approach, he's your man. He's trustee of the Scottish Tartans Authority, and I can't think of a better person to give us an insight into the history of tartan. Peter MacDonald, tartan man extraordinaire. It's wonderful. Thanks for having us in your attic. Tell me this, Peter. What is a tartan?
In simple terms, it's a pattern of, if you like, multicolored lines and designs in which the longways threads and the crossways threads are the same, run in the same proportion and number in both directions, long and wide.
All right.
So there's a simple, what is a tartan? Yeah.
And do you see that they're the same? Are they the same colour?
Yep, so it has to be the same colours in the same proportions and size in both directions.
In both directions? Oh, right, that didn't even occur to me. So what's the difference between a tartan and a check then?
Technically, you can't weave a check. So if we talk about a checkboard, if you think about it, it's got blue, black, black, white, black, white, black, white, and all the colours are what we would call pure colours. In terms of a tartan check, that might be a simple one there. But even so, where two colours cross, you get what we call a half tone. So
Because the thread's got to go over and under and over and under and
you're
over.
mixing, so you're mixing, let's say, red and blue, rather than red and red.
Yes.
So you're getting what we call a half tone. The other thing is that, so technically there is no difference between a tartan and a check. It's just how complex you get. So if you say to me a check, are we talking about two equal sized blocks, or 3 blocks, or 4 blocks? Or is it when you start making the line slightly different proportions? So in terms of what is the difference, there is no definitive line of where a check stops and a tartan starts.
But we know that the tartan's got to be weaved both ways.
Correct.
And a check doesn't. Yeah. Now, I remember this tartan from when we made a video with in that V&A exhibition, and you took us round that. And I remember this as being something they found in a bog in Glenafric from the 15th century, is that right?
Correct. We had the original piece, which is owned by the Scottish Tartans Authority. We had it carbon dated, which gave us a broad date of 1500 to 1600. So a remarkable piece, and this was my reconstruction based on the dye analysis. So it gave us the colours, but not necessarily the shades, and then you work with the shades.
And obviously the colours would have been the colours that they could use for dyes in those days.
Yeah.
And that will have changed over time, presumably.
It will. So nowadays, no one uses, commercially, no one uses natural dyes any longer. They're all artificial dyes, as from 1856. In the 16th or 15th century.
From 1856?
1856, the first artificial dye, which was Perkins Purple.
Oh, right.
Became very, very popular. Mauvine was another name for it. And it became very, very popular. And from them, we had all these, what they call aniline dyes or coal tar dyes. And they quickly suppressed, or supplanted rather, natural dyes because they were cheaper and easier to use.
Yes, it's like everything when something it's like nylon replaces cotton,
correct.
So and similarly the synthetic dyes have replaced those natural dyes. But 1856 it started.
But to go back to your question, in the 16th, 15th, 16th century, the dye stuffs that were available then, even that changed as we went into the 17th and 18th century because we started to import more and more imported dye stuffs, although they were still natural. So things like cochineal, some South American hardwoods, which gave you brighter, faster colours. So although we had them, it's a misconception to think that every district had their own dye shades or colours, because there are very, very few plants in Scotland that only grow in one place.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
So,
But what it does is it begs the question, clearly then, colours of tartans have changed over the years.
They have.
And presumably patterns, therefore, have changed over the years. Tell us about that.
so patterns have developed over time, and your simplest ones will have been a 2-colour check. And you can go back to, if you like, time immemorial for that. But even so,
The Picts.
But the Picts, who were the Picts? But even at that time, they were still.
That's another video.
If you base that, if you look at the mummies that were found in the Tarim Basin, who are Celts, they have quite complex tartans. So as soon as you could weave tartan, you could weave complex patterns. So it's actually, to some degree, what was available, what people wanted. There was an awful lot of sort of fashion aspect even in those days. If you like, someone said, "Oh, I want just 2 colours." Or I want
In
more
those
colours.
days, when are we talking about there?
So we're talking about probably the Middle Ages onwards. Tartan was certainly at the time of the Glenafric. It was not, as we might think of it today, everybody wearing tartan. Probably it was a high status textile because of the amount of dye stuffs and weaving time involved.
Right.
And it's only when you become really into the time of Bonnie Prince Charlie that everyone was in the Highland Army was encouraged to wear tartan as a unifying symbol. And then in the beginning of the 19th century, we get to the development of clan tartans as we understand them today.
Yes.
But if you like, the uniformity of tartan.
Yes, so that's interesting. If I've understood you rightly, what you're saying is, back in the day, posh people wore tartan, and over time, it migrated down to ordinary people.
I think, yeah, I mean, they did. And of course, like any other fashion item, the wealthiest would have always worn the best clothing. So they wore often a lot of red because it was a status colour, expensive, so they wore that. The middle classes always aspired to be the posh people.
Yes.
And the poor always wore whatever they could afford.
Whatever they could, yeah.
And they would often then have hand-me-downs or bits that was made from other things just sewn together.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean necessarily they were not wearing pretty patterns, if you like.
Yes.
But they probably didn't have them from new.
Yes,
so
yes. Right. So tell me about some of these patterns that you've got here.
So we got a number of here. We got a number of late 18th, early 19th century patterns. So we start to see the development of clan tartans, but also a lot of patterns that were just numbered patterns, simple what they called check patterns. Some of them then went on to become names. So there's what we would now call hunting rose.
So tell me about that transition from just being a pattern to being a named.
So I guess it's when it becomes a commercial entity. So when you were just weaving in your glen or whatever, the weaver would weave and produce whatever he liked from the dye stuffs, cloth available to him. When you then start to sell it, you then have to have if you like, a repertoire that you can name. And people gave names to patterns because they helped them sell better. Initially it was named after towns, say like Perth or something like Dundee perhaps.
Let's go with Perth.
Let's go with Perth. And then, at the beginning of the 19th century, there was a move back to what during a period they called the Highland Revival they almost reinvented a concept that didn't exist in the past, which was the idea of a uniform clan tartan. So
Yes.
named patterns for individuals.
Yes.
And we see that coming in from
So
1815.
a clan tartan is a marketing device.
Effectively, yes.
Yes.
It's a marketing and, if you like, a retro-historical
Yes.
element. It's a wannabe.
Yeah.
Whereas
It's no real.
Well, it's not real. In the past, people liked, so with past we're talking about, before the middle of the 18th century, people wore what they liked, could afford, or was available.
Yes.
No different from anything else today.
Yes.
Whereas later, it was part of a club. So it became like a club tie or a uniform tie.
Yes.
That's very much from the early 19th century onwards, and that's where we start to get the named clan tartans, and also a whole lot of fashion tartans. So here we've got the Victoria tartan, invented probably in 1838, 40, something like that. When Queen Victoria came to the throne,
Yes.
the weavers at the time went, "Oh, very popular, let's make a pattern and name it after her."
Yes.
And here, there's one for her
Like-
husband.
just like we'll have mugs or plates or whatever these
Yeah,
days.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And here's Albert. So they did a Victoria tartan and an Albert tartan. Actually, it's the same tartan, but one's got a white ground and one's got a blue ground.
Is that right?
A different size pattern, but actually it's basically both the Royal Stuart basis that have then got
That's
variations on them.
because to the naked eye, they look quite
They
different.
do. So that's the starting pattern. Actually, that's a version called Prince Charles Edward. But from that, developed these two tartans.
That's interesting. So this is morphed into those, and just by taking out certain colour.
Or adding bits, so variations on
yeah.
a theme, and that's how design works, basically.
Right, okay. So here's the thing. What about a McFummey tartan, right? If I wanted to make a McFummey tartan or a Scotland History Tours tartan, how would I go about that process?
So tartans have always been designed, as I say, locally, but from the early 19th century, weavers were doing all sorts of fashion tartans and new tartans for individuals, etc. In the old days, when I started 40 plus years ago, we would draw everything out on ruled card and submit them, paint them if you like. Nowadays, there are CAD computer programs that will do that for us. And so you would start, if I was doing it or one of the weavers doing it, they will work with a client to look at the colours that they are interested in using, any other elements of the pattern, so a bit of their history. So they might look at, in your case, say, look at the Perth tartan, which dates to this period.
Yes.
So 1780, 1790, something like that. Let's start with that. You're from Perth, and then look at what other elements of your background or family history you might like to incorporate.
Have some Ghanaian kente cloth colours added in there.
Exactly. So something like that, you'd say, well, how would you use that? And then we'll be looking at how to incorporate those so that you have a design that, if you works traditionally. So traditionally, colours such as white or pale blue or yellow were generally used sparingly because they're quite brash. You know, and if you use them in large quantities, you end up with the Buchanan tartan or the Loud MacLeod tartan, which are fine. But if you started from here, you probably wouldn't end up there.
Are you telling me that my red, gold and green isn't going to help me when I go deer hunting? Is that what
deer are actually colourblind.
All right, okay. the stag was going to get away anyway.
It's the movement. They'll hear you coming long before they see you.
They'll hear me. They'll hear me right enough. So what's the process that I would go through?
So as I say, you start with initially discussing the sort of design concepts and then coming up with a number of designs based on that, probably printed out. Refine those down to, you'd say, well, I quite like that one, but maybe we could have more red or less red or a bit more yellow or something like that. So starting with 2 or 3 designs, refining them down to one, and then working that out to, you've got something that's printed that looks pretty good to what you're happy with. Then we're looking at the difference between colour and shade. So when we say, yes, I'd like, so here we've got several different tartans. They've all got red and green in them, but they are all different shades of red and green. They're not different reds and greens because there's only one red, one green, whatever.
Yes.
So we're talking about which shades.
Yes.
And the skill, certainly historically, when you're designing tartans, was balancing the shades. So whereas often today, you have, if you like, a uniform palette, it's much nicer to look at them and say, well, how do I balance the darker blue against a mid-green or the reverse, etc. So you actually would then work with the shades to produce
So you've
something.
not got one screaming clashing against
Exactly
another.
that. You want something that's sympathetic, if you like. Looking at how you refine the lines so that you get something that's workable. Think also about the size of the pattern. So here we have, so here's a reconstruction that I did last year of a portrait of 1719, 1714. Same tartan in 3 different sizes.
Can I just check something?
Yep.
You're saying 1714,
Yep.
but that's before this kind of big
Absolutely.
clan
Yep.
Tartany, Sobieski brothers type thing.
So it's from 2 portraits, so it's a consolidation of 2 portraits of Grant warriors, if you like. But the interesting point here is, I say, you've got 3 different settings, sizes of the pattern. It's the same thread count, but because the heavier cloth, midweight cloth, lightweight cloth, the yarn is finer or thicker, depending which way around you go, it will change the size of the pattern. So
oh, wow.
exactly the same pattern, different colours. So, you know, if you want a tie, you want a smaller pattern. If you want a carpet, you probably want a bigger pattern.
Yes.
So it's then how you change that proportionally.
Right, okay.
So anyway, you would come up with the design, work on the, first we get your colours and the pattern, then refine the shades to get the shade you're happy with. Consider the size of the set, the size of the pattern, which would be...
How many times it repeats,
depending on the width, and that would be how you want to use it. So there's no point in having a huge pattern if you want to wear it as an XL or scarf, because you won't see it.
Yes.
And conversely, if you have a very small pattern and you have it on your carpet, you'll end up with sore eyes.
Yeah.
So you just think about those sort of things. And once all that's refined, you've selected the yarns, it would then be woven. Normally as a process, or a part of that process, it would also then be recorded with the Scottish Register of Tartans.
Oh, right, okay. So I would go down to Edinburgh and say, this is my tartan.
Well, you would do it online, like most things in life, but you would put it in and you would have to say, so if you were doing it yourself, you can do that. If I were doing it as a designer, I would have to have your authority. So you would have to send me some form of proof that you wanted me to do this. And we would record the pattern, the thread count of it, the rationale behind it. So why have you chosen these colours, or what's the significance of this? And it can
So I've got to tell them that in the...
Yeah, and it can be as more, you could simply say, I like those colours. Or you could simply say, oh, well, I wanted it because it's got the Kinty textile in it. We've taken some of the Perth tartan, so you can put as much as you want.
And tell them my story.
Yeah, and then it would have a category. So it might be royal, it might be military. In your case, it would be name, or it could be a fashion tartan or whatever.
Yeah, and they would record that, and that would then be mine.
It would
How many recorded tartans are there?
Recorded tartans, I think the register's got something like 9,000 on there. So they started recording.
That's a lot.
They started recording in 2008. They had a seed corn, if you like, that they'd inherited of about 3,500, I think it was, and they've added new ones. So you don't have to record a tartan, but a lot of people choose to because it makes it, if you like, publicly knowledgeable.
Yes,
if that makes sense. Database I run for the Scottish Tartans Authority has 12,500 entries.
12,500.
And a lot of those are historic pieces, so just one-off examples that we record, if you like, for posterity and study.
But the McFummey tartan will be 12,501.
Or 97, or whatever it is on that date. So I sit on the panel, the advisory panel that considers new tartans. We get about 12 or so every week. So you need to behave, or I'll no, that's a fail. Fummey fail. So they come to us blind. We don't know who they are.
Yes.
We know what the name is, but not who's designed.
So what would you, in your decision-making process, to authorise a tartan, what would you be?
So there are a number of different panel members. From my perspective, I'm looking at as a historian and as a weaver. So I'm saying, is the pattern unique? So it's not going to be either, it doesn't replicate an existing pattern, or be so close that it's likely to confuse. Does it pass the across the room test, if you like? Is the name something that you can use, you have authority to use?
Yes.
So you couldn't call it, I'm going to call it the Perth tartan, because you don't have authority to do that.
I bet there's not a McFummey tartan out there, though.
There's not.
No. But
yet.
That's the next task we need to do. I need to go and make a McFummey tartan somewhere. And that's the next thing we're going to do. I'm going to head off, and there's going to be another video coming up where I go and have a tartan designed and woven. Now, either that video will come up on screen in a moment, or there's a video of when Peter took us around the tartan exhibition at the V&A Museum in Dundee. That's a fantastic watch, so go and watch one of those two videos. There's a link coming up on screen now. Support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member, or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, Hammy and Dochus can be Lama alive. Cherry and Drasta.